Hello and welcome to this video on how to generate questions from your data set. As a data professional, a data scientist, a data analyst, you'll find yourself in situations where you work with data on a day-to-day basis. And before you begin making sense out of your data, before you begin your analysis, before you begin creating dashboard visualization for your data set, you would need to create, sometimes you might have to create questions, business questions from the data. In some cases, the questions will be presented to you and then you have to go get the data set to answer those questions. In most other cases, you'll be handed over a data set to perform a specific analysis. And in achieving that goal, you would have to create some business questions or questions, that will suit into the data set you're given. So let's see some of the interesting steps or points to consider before you create or set your questions from your data set. Yes, so the very first point, the very first and the most important concept or point to be considered is the understanding of your data set. So you have to begin by understanding your data set. And in understanding your data set, what does it entail? Number one, before drafting your business questions, you need to thoroughly understand the data set you are working with. So like I said again, what does it entail? Number one, you examine the data set structure. So it starts by examining the data set structure. This point entails looking at the tables, the columns, and relationships between the tables. So if you have an already designed or modeled data set, which means if the data set comes in a modeled form where all the related tables are already connected, relationship has been created, what you'll be required to understand is the entity relationship diagram, ERD. So when you have the entity relationship diagram, that will show you the way the different data sets are connected, right? It will also help you understand the different columns that are stored in each of those tables and which column is connecting to the other table. So that is the very first thing you have to do. Examine the data set, look into the tables, look into the columns, look into the relationship between the tables in the data set or the database. The next is to understand the context of the data set. So learn about the industry or the business domain related to the data set. So in getting to understand the context of the data set is very, very important in helping you craft out some useful questions that would come in handy, right? That can be answered by data set. And then finally, you begin to explore your data, right? Get a sense of the data by performing some basic data profiling, such as checking the data distribution if you're using Power BI, check unique values, check missing values, and all. Now, all of these things sometimes might be required to note down some of your findings as you're exploring your data set. You have to do them meticulously. You have to do this intentionally. You have to do this carefully as a data professional, because you don't want to perform an analysis that will lead into any false conclusion or false insights. You might have insight from a data set, but if it's not well prepared, then such an insight will be false. All right, the next point to be considered before crafting out your business question is identifying the key metrics and dimensions that can be formed from a data set. So this is the case where your data comes in form of a flat file. All right, it hasn't been broken down into dimensions, or say the data is already presented in different dimensions. You have to understand the key metrics, right, from the quantitative or quantitative or the fact table, as well as understanding the different dimensions that are in such data set. Here, what does it entail? So identifying the key metrics, which we refer to as the quantitative data, and the dimensions, which are usually considered to be the categorical data within the data set. you would have to list the important metrics. Okay, begin by listing the important metrics. Here you identify the numerical values that represent performance, quantities, or measurements. Then next, you identify the dimensions. Here you have to recognize the categorical attributes that provide context or segmentation. Okay, so if you have a flat file, that is a data set that comes in one single table with multiple columns, you then begin to analyze or begin to study each column, see if it's possible to break that single flat file into various dimensions depending on the context, depending on the segmentation you would love to have your data sets, and that will also inform the type of analysis that you want to perform. All right, and also have your facts table, which is a table that usually contains the quantitative data. Okay, this aspect is also important in the consideration of the business questions that will be drafted from the question or from the data set. Next is to begin to understand the various types and classification of data. So in that context, I would have to go over this again to tell us the various types and classification of data set, because in setting your business questions from your data, having a clear understanding of what type of data you're dealing with is also very, very important. Very important. So when you have your data set, you can have two classifications of data in terms of quantitative and qualitative. For quantitative data, this is a data or they are data that can be measured, that can be calculated, that can, you can, so it values, numbers, continuous or discrete numbers. So any data set that has to do with quantity is referred to as quantitative data. While qualitative, on the other hand, is a data that is used to qualify things, that can be placed into category, that can be used to categorize things. All right, so those are types of qualitative data. I'll give some examples as I break these classes into further smaller units. For quantitative data, we also have types of quantitative which are discrete. Discrete quantitative data are those data that comes in whole numbers. All right, whole numbers. For example, your age column can be classified as quantitative data that is discrete, because the ages of people are represented in whole numbers. I'm 15 years old, I'm 34, I'm 36, I'm 40, I'm 50. So that comes in whole numbers. They are considered to be discrete. Okay, and when you're considering a data set that has to do with number of customers, so how many customers do you have for this particular business? So number of customers also have to do with, they are classified as quantitative but discrete. Number of items sold, all right? Number of items sold is also discrete and quantitative data. So anything that has to do with whole in your data set is said to be discrete. While continuous, data set that contains some decimal numbers. Okay, sales values can be continuous because when you sell in terms of the price, okay, or sales figure, you can have and some, maybe your sales figure as 15,374,780 naira and some kobo. So that's dots with the kobo will form decimal place. Even if it's in dollars and cents, it comes in decimal place. So that sales value can be continuous, right? When you are looking at data that has to do with the weight of individual, weight is also considered to be continuous data. Height is also considered to be continuous data. So any data that allows for decimal places are referred to as continuous. They are all quantitative, discrete, or continuous. I've given quite a number of examples. Now let's come to qualitative data. Qualitative data can be nominal. Nominal data type is any quantitative data that is usually categorical, all right, but cannot necessarily be placed, or order can be placed on such data. When you have nominal data, you cannot necessarily or directly place order on such type of categorical or qualitative data. A perfect example would be gender, all right, male, female. Male, female is an example of a nominal qualitative data. Okay, when you look at nominal data, again, you can look at education qualification. No, that can be ordinal because you can place order to education qualification. Let me see if I can quickly cite another example of nominal data. Let's think about what let's say, country. Country can be an example of a nominal data because you can have the countries of, the country where someone's country. Okay, you cannot necessarily place order except you want to begin to order the country based on the spelling, alphabetical order, but that may not necessarily give you any insight in your analysis, except you are interested in ordering the countries in a particular order. But any data that doesn't give order or place order into the arrangements or into the categories is said to be nominal data. Then we have ordinal. Ordinal is where you have categorical data that can be placed in a specific order. Like I mentioned earlier, education, qualification. You can have people grouped into these different categories in this order. Say, okay, let's start with those with first school living certificate. Then you go to people with BSc, people with master's degree, people with PhD. If you want to consider just that route, or you want to look at those people who also attended polytechnic with HND or ND qualifications, you can place an order to that, right? Now, if you have to do anything that has to do with ranking, okay, even grades are also an example of an order that can be placed, ordinal data where you can place order to. So all these types of data sets and classes of data should also be considered in your data sets before you set your business question. All right, you want to know, is it ordinal data? Is it nominal? Is it continuous? Is it discrete? These types of data we put into consideration and we also inform the types of business question you want to create. And it will also inform the breaking of your tables into dimensions and facts. Dimensions tables are usually quantitative in nature. Facts tables are usually qualitative in nature. All right, let's move on to, now you've understood your data. You're able to tell the type and the classes of data. The next thing is defining the business goals. You would have to define the business goals. Here, you consider the very important business goals or objectives for that particular business. The first thing is the business. You discuss the business objectives. Understand what the company aims to achieve using the data provided. What do they want to achieve? What specific goals do they have in mind to achieve? All right, or the department or the section from which the data was extracted, what are the goals that they are looking to achieve? And that is very important in considering drafting your business question. Again, you have to align with the objectives that you've already identified. Ensure that the questions are directly related to the goals or the business goals, okay, or the stakeholders' goals, or the section, the departmental goals as to what they want to achieve. So you have to align the business questions with the goals. And next is to formulate the questions. So once you have settled all these other components we discussed, you can then come to the point of setting or formulating the questions. Now, you start formulating your questions by drafting the questions. So start drafting business questions based on the data sets you have studied, based on the metrics you have considered, based on the dimensions that are made in the table or in the data set, and based on the business goals. You have to set your question or draft your questions based on all of these components. And then make sure that the question you're drafting is smart. Draft smart questions. Aim to create questions that are specific, questions that are actionable, questions that are measurable. You have to create a smart business question, specific, actionable, and measurable. You don't just create questions that are just open-ended, that cannot be answered directly with the data set. So please draft smart questions. Then you prioritize your questions. So questions, you may have 10 questions, 20, 15 questions, 5 questions. You have to prioritize them. In what order do you want to get them answered? So not all questions are equally important or actionable. You have to prioritize your questions. Prioritize their questions based on relevance, impact, and feasibility. Okay? Consider these 3 components in prioritizing your questions. And then rank your questions. Rank the questions from high to low priority. Okay, put all this into consideration in answering or in setting or drafting your business questions. So as you continue with your course in the classroom, the first thing you have to do from understanding the business questions or the business problem from the previous module you've taken, the next thing you have to do now in this module is to begin setting your business questions, right? Set your business question that will be answered. You have already been presented with the data set. I believe by now you've studied the data set and then you have a clear understanding of what it is. So if you haven't gone through this lecture or this video, I would advise that you go back to the data set, study the dictionary, study every single component of data set, and then you begin setting your questions, having every component we've discussed in this video in mind. Okay, next, you have to validate your questions. Actually, it's very important that you validate your questions. So before finalizing, validate your questions. Do a first check. You check to ensure the questions can be answered with the available data and the Power BI capacities. If you're working with Power BI, if it's Tableau or any other visualization, to check if they have the capacity, right, to get the questions answered. Next, second check is to check if the necessary data is present, and if not, consider how to obtain to manipulate it. Sometimes you may have to go outside the provided data to get some supporting data to answer some specific questions, okay? But you don't have to go outside the entire context of the goals of the business or the goals of the department. And finally, you document your questions. Documentation of your question comes last after you've drafted everything. Now you document your questions, your business questions. Your documentation should include 1, the question itself, 2, the context or business goal that the questions would address rather. And that's it. When you have done all of this, then it means you have your business questions drafted and you're good to go with your analysis or your exploration of data. You are good to go to your data visualization and ensure that you're choosing the right charts to answer the questions you have drafted. Having said this, you also consider the metrics and dimensions involved when documenting your questions, because the questions would be used to generate those metrics and get and also the dimensions that are contained in the data set. With this, I hope that you've gotten a full understanding, a grasp of certain business questions. If you have any question, you can feel free to drop your questions in the priority level. I forgot to mention priority level should be considered also when documenting your question. So thank you very much. If you have questions, feel free to drop your questions in the comment section. This is going to our YouTube video. For those who are students, you can also ask questions in the classroom. You can also ask questions during live sessions. Then, if you don't want to wait for the live session, please remember you can drop your questions in our communication channels. Thank you very much for watching this. I'll see you again in the next one. I hope you've gotten a full understanding and grasp of setting or drafting business questions from your data sets. Do have a wonderful day. Bye.